Wait, there's more.
But wait, there's more.
All right, welcome to yet another zany episode of Nerdy West Coast Swing. Tonight we're going to be talking about hip-hop styling in the first of a three-part series. I think next week we're doing contemporary, and then the week after that we're doing blues. It's very exciting. I'm going to pop the first video into the chat. It is of Markus Smith and Emeline Rochefeuille from the New Year's 2018-2019 event. I forget which one, Spotlight Dance. Go ahead and give it a watch, and when you're done, come back and let us know and we'll get started. Isn't it though? Kate just said in the chat her control is off the charts. True story, and it is excellent. The sugar push, like at the beginning, just blows my mind, and we'll talk about that tonight.
Just to start out, so we're looking at two videos that have very slow songs. So it is a lot easier to see the hip hop styling and how they fill the space because they are such slow songs. So there's kind of in my mind, there's about 6 general things that separate hip hop styling from other styling, in my opinion. There might be others to other people, but for me, the first one is kind of gliding, right? So having weight on one foot, moving the other around it. And then having some stops at any point that is musically appropriate, right? Whereas, other music, other styles, you're probably going to have something that you want to continue your movement. Hip hop, you're going to see a lot more stops, intentional. Body rolls are another thing. You can see so many different types of body rolls being used in both of these videos. It's not just the normal type that you're going to see that starts up on the upper body and heads down. There's going to be a lot more happening. Some are going to go angled. Some will start at different positions on the body. The next thing is kind of controlling the weight shift, which, in general, you should be controlling your weight shift already, just because of the body control. However, there's a lot more of it. You're going to stop, I don't know. I don't know how they calculate swing content for stops. But I'm assuming as long as it's in the middle of a swing pattern, it still counts.
What was the chat? Because it's not letting me see it.
Kate said, how do you calculate swing content for stops? As long as they stretch away to regain connection, I allow it. Do you approach stops the same way? For the most part, I would say. It just kind of depends on where they're at in their movement. So there might be a stop that you're just going to go into a neutral type of connection, right? So you're not getting anything to move any which way, and they're going to do something. So if they're stopping and then they're doing a progression of little stops that's musical, right? Rather than just having that immediate stop and then stretch. So, if there's just a stop and they're going to the next pattern or something, yes, that would be the way that I would approach it, would be, once they are stretching away from you and we're getting that connection, that's how you would approach that. Exceptions to the rule, of course. But yeah, not all the time are you going to get an immediate start and stop. So that's just my thought. Cassie, did you have anything to say about that?
Swing content is one of those black holes. I think in this context, when you're hip hop styling, as long as you revert to a West Coast swing style connection at the end, and you're using that to re-enter some sort of West Coast swing basic, be that from an anchored position into the beginning of a new pattern, or from the hip hop styling right into the middle of a known West Coast swing pattern. I think that helps. It's when you don't transition well into or out of your styling. Yeah, but I don't know, personally, the whole swing content bandwagon, like I believe swing is, like, knowing our basics and knowing our history is very important, but this dance was literally built around changing as music changes.
Right.
So for my own personal expression, I like doing all the things in West Coast swing. That's kind of what it's here for, and it's why we all love it. Competing is just a different bag of tricks that can be an enigma depending on who you're talking to. So did you finish your 6 elements of
No, I was almost, and I had 2 more to talk about.
right, cool.
So I was talking about just controlling that weight shift. Isolations are another thing. Very simple. It's a very easy thing to practice as well. And then the last thing I normally see, not always in the West Coast, but kind of the concept of like getting low, right? So rather than like standing up all the way, you kind of ground yourself more, and you might have more bent legs rather than a nice straight line through everything. So that's just kind of a general like hip hop concept, is getting low. So transitioning that into the West Coast category, it's going to be kind of similar, but it looks a little different. So that's all I had to say to start out with. Sorry, that was a lot.
No, that was excellent. Thank you for that. That was helpful for me. Like, I'm with you every single, oh yes, check. Gonna start framing through.
Just very slow beginning.
Yep.
Which musically is very cool. I like how he mouths the word wow. And
So good. So I think maybe 2 weeks ago, I was talking about my little soapbox of people in Jack and Jill's trying to do too much in the starter steps.
Yeah.
And this is like a really good example of trying to do something unique in a starter step.
Yeah.
But when you do something unique, you need to give yourself and your partnership permission to take time to see what it's going to become, as opposed to rushing out of it. So it's kind of like back to the transitions topic.
Yeah. Very much agreed. And they go about this beginning in a way that they're still finding the connection between them. They're not allowing that piece to fall away to kind of experiment with where they might go with things. So, starting about here-ish, we're gonna start getting some hip hop styling. So one thing about this, watching at full speed, it is still slow. So you can see like just how controlled she is on those weight shifts going through her turns. And we have another little head roll. So they both do kind of a little isolation thing. Emeline does more upper body, kind of with her chest, still keeping that connection with him. She's kind of moving into his hand. And then he does something more with his legs. He brings those heels up. he's just doing a weight shift, right? Which looks pretty easy the way he's doing it. However, is a little bit more stylized for hip hop because he is keeping it isolated. So it's not moving all the way up through his body. It's just like the lower half that you see that's doing something really.
Yeah, because like a lot of the kind of fundamentals behind gliding and the weight shifts in hip hop is about creating the optical illusion that the weight is not on the foot that it is.
Right.
Which for those of you who are interested in or have ever danced Argentine tango, being able to ghost weight transfers is an important tool in that dance as well. Because this sugar push might be like my favorite part of this whole dance.
Mm-hmm.
Because of the hit on the forward compression.
Yeah, from Emeline.
Yeah, right there. It doesn't look like much when you're just framing it.
Right.
But the way her body very much hits a max forward point very suddenly.
Yeah.
Like right here. And then she just ricochets back from it.
Mm-hmm.
Takes so much control. And it's a really, because she's not really hitting it too terribly hard.
No,
but yeah, I'll let you talk about it.
Because it's faster. But just slowing it down here, it doesn't look like she's doing too terribly much different. It's just more of a, so she has that hand, Markus brings it like kind of up more than you would see kind of in a normal, like one-handed, sugar push of some sort, however you want to do that. But it, like, the way that she goes into that stop, she communicates it through that hand, right? So rather than just pressing into it until he totally sends her out, she's kind of rebounding off his hand. So then he's knowing she's going back the other way. So you see that like really small compression, and then she moves herself back.
Mm-hmm.
But at full speed, he has some really nice syncopation going into that. So right here is a good example of some hip hop styling. Like both of them have bent legs as they're going through something rather than straightening, one at least. And Emeline at least is adding a little bit of kind of body roll in what she's doing as well.
Yeah, that's settled right here through her hips.
Mm-hmm.
She's really delaying her pelvis forward.
Yeah.
And sending it back. And that comes from last week, hands, shoulders, toes, and hips.
Another thing to point out is that you see a lot more heel leads rather than toe leads in a hip hop styling.
That also comes mechanically from being more into your knees, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you're, it's the way that you're settled back a little bit more. So I like this little thing that she does. It's like a little side-to-side weight shift, but she's doing it with some added body to it. So really, she's just going back and forth on her feet. Like nothing special is actually happening in terms of her feet. She's just kind of bending into the knees. And then the way that she's letting the upper body kind of follow where she's going with her like hips makes it look a little different. So you can see that her hips are moving before anything else, and just the rest of her body is kind of following. So we're at about 20 minutes time for this one.
Was there a specific section in the video that you wanted to like skip forward to?
Not necessarily. I think overall they do a good job of kind of showing the different principles throughout the whole dance.
So let's move on to the other video. Let me grab the link. But we've got Ken Rutland and Bryn Anderson from Sea to Sky Invitational 2019.
Of course, they do.
Of course. They're like the new Jordan and Tot, always drawing each other. Give it a watch and let us know when you're done. All right. Is there stuff you wanted to say before I share the screen?
I think so. I mean, just basically you're going to see the same principles in here, but the way that Ken and Bryn use it makes it look very different than the way that Emeline and Markus use it. So just right at the very beginning, we're starting out with some isolations. Nothing like super aggressive, just some very small ones.
I really love how Ken links his isolations.
Yeah.
So like, for instance, at the very beginning here, he starts with his head. He's bringing his head laterally left towards his left shoulder.
Mm-hmm.
And then that then like kinetically transfers to his shoulder. The shoulder drops, which then makes the other shoulder lift. Mm-hmm. And then he goes back, and then his ribs are lifted, and he starts settling them down. Mm-hmm. And that downward was what brings up the elbows. And just like how the progression of his isolations are very organic and natural.
Yeah, it's kind of like a body roll a bit. Just the way he goes about it, but he's just kind of taking more time to move the parts of his body a little differently. But one thing I did want to point out is what he does at the beginning. He does some footwork that looks kind of complicated, at speed at least, but what he's really doing is he has weight on one foot and he kind of just rotates one in and out, and then he does a weight shift.
Okay, that's what the feet start moving. Okay.
So right here, he does in and out, and now he puts weight on that foot to move the other one out.
Yep.
Pretty simple. In, out, weight transfer, move the foot. And he's gradually putting that weight down because he has his heel up, that he has that he's putting that weight on.
Yeah, so by this frame, his weight is completely committed there.
Right. And most of his weight is in that right standing foot. But the more that that left foot moves away, the more weight is in that right foot. He looks very pleased with what he's about to lead.
I know. I would be too, not gonna lie. That was a nice choice. All right, I'm gonna skip ahead to another section.
That's some interesting footwork.
Yeah, it's so, because he brings his left foot underneath him to balance himself. Crosses in front. And again, he's very much underneath himself.
The weight is on the right foot.
And he's able to basically applejack in the air.
Yeah. Interesting.
So I think this is the first time he does like a longer gliding sequence, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
He's actually traveling.
Yeah. And it's interesting, he's not like being super intentional about it. He's just kind of letting himself go where he's going and then using kind of a principle of gliding where you have weight on one foot while the other is moving.
Mm-hmm.
So like it doesn't look super clean, but it looks very organic. What was intentional, however, was that inward rotation of his left leg.
Mm-hmm. And what you said about it being organic, about where he's placing his feet, is really important as a leader, because if you're doing styling, you still need to be performing your function as a leader. So like right here, Bryn isn't going anywhere, so it's Ken's job to scroll away to reestablish connection. And based on the pattern he wants to lead next, he's positioning himself relative to Bryn in a very specific place to be able to lead the next pattern.
But it seems that he is being intentional with where his upper body is going, and then letting the feet follow.
Yeah.
Just in a stylized way.
So this is another styling for Bryn. And I marked it because of what you mentioned with Emeline earlier.
Yeah. She does it a little bit differently because Emeline uses her hips. And Bryn, she is initiating it with her hips, but she's not quite separating her body as much. So it looks a little bit more like one rather than that really like snake type of look that you got from Emeline.
Yeah, because with Emeline, she was bringing her free foot back directly underneath herself to create a stronger snake sensation, whereas Bryn is actually shifting laterally from side to side, whereas Emeline was bringing her feet more underneath her.
I love the term snake sensation.
Snake sensation. Maybe that'll be a joke that lives on. One can hope.
But yeah, also you see there, she's kind of staying in those bent knees rather than having any type of nice lines. She's coming into a line right there because she's bringing those legs together with like the inner thigh rather than just like moving them together. But as soon as she gets to her like position that she's staying in, she gets back into some bent knees, like the term getting low, right?
Yeah, and then when she chooses to come out of it, this is where we're coming back to swing technique. She makes sure to close her feet.
Yeah.
Before she takes another step. Yeah,
she drags it through underneath her.
next section, I believe, is right here. This is like the partner body roll moment.
Yeah. So she starts that, and then he ends up in the same position that she does because he sees that she's doing that. So then he goes into it. I like that. And one thing to note is both of them are very much doing it with their head almost isolated, right? Like, so their head is, for the most part, staying where it's at. And so we're starting with the shoulders to do a body roll rather than starting with the head.
Yep.
And so they're just staying right on top of themselves rather than moving that head. And the way to do that body roll while you are just staying right on top of yourselves, right, is those bent knees they have. If they did not have bent knees, it would not resolve anywhere.
Yes.
So right there, I wanted to note, she gets put into a little bit of a dip, which normally for a dip, you would kind of see a, like a rounding of the momentum, right? So her going down and then having it come to an end and come back up. But because of the song that they're dancing to, it is a stop, right? Which is very intentional. And it is, yeah, she's just like holding herself. She's, I believe, making that choice rather than him holding her there.
Yeah. I agree, because he's just basically being supportive, creating the opportunity, and then she's making the choice.
He's letting her sink as much as she wants to. So one thing I just kind of wanted to talk about was going back to the stops, because we have quite a few going on, especially right about here, right? So Bryn is stopping in the middle of this pattern to do some styling, which is totally fine. But she is stopping very quickly, right? So it's not like she's placing her foot and then continuing her momentum. She's placing and stopping all at once. So I would say based on the song, it's probably a staccato note, which musically there's a quarter note, which is like if you're to hit one versus one, right? So one is a staccato. And so that's what she would be hitting by just really freezing rather than kind of letting things continue. And then she's doing some like isolation to start her movement again.
One thing that she is so excellent at is continuing a roll from the shoulder to the fingertips.
Yeah.
And I just want to frame through that really slowly, because as soon as she starts the body roll from her hips, tucking her pelvis forward, and then letting it roll up her spine. And then as it starts to affect her shoulder, she rotates her arm and lifts her elbow while she's dropping her wrist, and then the wrist follows through. Like, it is a really excellent illusion that she has mastered.
Yeah, she's doing that.
Yeah.
And then he's doing a little bit of an isolated movement, I would say. It's a little bit of a hop, kind of, the way that he's doing it.
Yeah, I like it because this is taking that kind of the really simple concept of like you're in an open position, single hand hold, one partner starts at the end of their non-connected hand a roll from their fingertips, through their shoulders down to the connected hand, and then it goes to the other partner.
Mhm.
They're taking that concept, but using it in a much higher technique skill level, because the roll's going up Bryn's body, and then Ken chooses to let that affect him,
Mhm.
and he takes it laterally and does his own thing. But it's still a call and response
Yeah, it
for
is.
styling between the partners.
Mhm. Even though he's not doing a body roll also out of it,
Yeah,
he's taking the momentum from the top to the bottom.
yeah. Keeping the general overall like tone of
Mhm.
what she did, but doing it his own way.
He had those little like stylized side steps,
Mm-hmm.
which was a nice choice to do something musically, but as you're moving where you need to move.
Yep.
It's a very simple thing. And it's interesting to me. I'm not sure if Bryn does it all the time, but she has a very intentionally flexed foot on her foot that's in like a passe that's up by her knee. And that's something, like I was saying earlier, you're not going to have those nice lines as much with like a hip hop styling, right? So she has that bend already in her weighted leg, and then she has it in her leg that's up, but then she's also continuing it to make an extra angle with that foot. So there's just a lot of shaping to look at.
I love it because on it creates a really great spiral effect, because on the one hand you have this really great arc through her body
Mm-hmm.
that's actually creating her balance.
Yeah.
But then on the other side you have this situation going on, which just makes it at speed really dynamic and interesting to watch.
And I like that she chooses to come out of that because she is in such a dropped position. She chooses to hit the next part by coming up and then switching the weight and coming up rather than going back down. So up and up.
Yeah, and that's part of like, because pulsing is a West Coast swing concept.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is kind of where you can have the blending of hip hop styling with the bent knees. But if you're pulsing the music like a West Coast swing dancer,
Mm-hmm.
that can be swing content.
I like that she does it and then he copies her.
Mm-hmm.
It's a nice addition. Rather than him just moving out of it immediately.
Yep. And it gives him a moment to think.
Mm-hmm.
And to like recalibrate the partnership. It's like, okay, Bryn's waiting for me to do something.
Mm-hmm.
Because I know it can be a struggle as a leader. It's like, okay, we just did something cool together, but the transition out is awkward because you're not taking the time
Right.
to do it and let it be organic. Signature Ken booty pop.
Always.
Always. I just noticed Bryn doing a thumbs up there. Pretty sure that's what that was.
So I think for the most part, we talked about all the different concepts in this video as well.
Yep.
And you can see like it's a totally different look to the dance rather than with Markus and Emeline. And they both have slow songs with a lot of room for hits, and they're both, you know, more of a hip hop style. So it's nice to see that there are different ways that you can go about using the same concept.
Yep. And if we take a little bit of a wider look at the musicality of this dance in particular, I really enjoy how they're using the same elements over and over again, but just slightly differently. Because I think this is like the third time we've seen this kind of pulsing back and forth in this dance. But it works because it's creating like a cohesive dance. And then again, we're seeing this kind of call and response. However, this time Ken is the one originating the call with some gliding. And I want to say the way he glides over her foot that is amazing.
So we have a comment. Any comments on full body rolls? Some instructors specifically mention it is not currently in West Coast swing fashion.
Oh, geez. That's funny. I was actually considering bringing up that topic because I have been taught since the beginning of my West Coast swing career that like body rolls are out of style, and particularly body rolls that go through the whole body, like head to toe. But in practice, that is a lie.
I do think it depends on what style we're talking about, because the body rolls, like the full body rolls, I'm going to say are something that's going to be more in like a hip hop stylized song rather than if you get like just a contemporary type song. And so in that sense, like I would say maybe it's not in fashion in like all types of songs, right?
Agreed.
All types of styling. But like you can still use it. It's still, you know, it creates a lot of interesting visual aspects to it. So
yeah, because it's a relevant form of styling, and as long as you're choosing your moments,
right?
And it becomes problematic, for instance, if every slingshot you go into, you body roll away and then body roll back. Like that should not be your basic slingshot. But it's a great piece of styling, and especially if you increase your vocabulary of body roll, so you're not just doing it in one dimension or always starting from the same point in your body. Like practice increasing how many dimensions you're in, X, Y, and Z, and starting it from different points in your body and going to different points. So instead of just rolling from your hips to your head or from your head to your hips, try rolling from your hand to your left foot or from your hand to your head, and like just mixing up what you're doing with it. And that also opens up your ability in the moment to body roll appropriately to the music, because you can start a body roll from almost any position. So
I would say that a good place in like musically a good place to put in a body roll is when the music is going from like a lower note to a higher note or a higher note to a lower note, right? That's a really good place to put a body roll. However, you might not always get like a really long like piece of that rise or drop of music, right? It might be one beat rather than like 3 beats. So it's good to have the ability to just do body rolls from specific parts of your body, because that way if you have 1 beat but it goes with that like transfer of the music, then you can just, you know, do part of your body that'll make it so that it's not like rushed, right? So we wouldn't want to do like a full body roll on like 1 count, right? It's going to look a little bit more rush. So that's just my 2 cents on that.
Yep. And another thing that I think can be something to watch out for when you're learning and practicing body rolls is to make sure you're grounded out the other end of a body roll.
Mm-hmm.
Because for instance, if you have a very wide stance and you're kind of body rolling from one foot to the other, if you're not fully weighted and grounded on that second foot by the time you're done with the body roll, it's not going to look finished, and your transition to your next whatever you're doing isn't going to look very good. So that's something to consider.
Basically, you're going to end a body roll if it's going up to down, like it's going to end on one bent leg at least, if not.
Yep.
So.
Yeah. Cool. Any other questions, comments, concerns about hip hop styling? All right. I was thinking of adding just one little interesting thing. The concept from animation. So not dancing animation. That's something separate that I have no knowledge of. But like character animation, like Disney 2D, 3D. And it's the concept of overshoot. So it's something that I like to think of when I'm trying to do like popping and locking for myself. And it's the idea that you hit an extreme and you kind of bounce back from it a little bit. And so that's a more exaggerated, so you can see it, how I'm bouncing back. But like a lot of the times a hit is because you're hitting a more extreme position and bouncing back from it just a little bit. And that's where the popping comes from. And then there's the other kind where it hits like almost like a wall and it freezes and then it relaxes back. And so that's what we saw with Emeline in that push break, where she like hits a wall and like stops in space and comes back. But the other style is to overshoot and kind of spring back ever so slightly and let it dissipate. And so just like 2 little things to keep in the back of your mind, because I know some people instruct like popping as like a muscular action, like really suddenly contracting a muscle, for instance.
Technically, I mean, it is, but that's not really the way that you need to go about thinking about it.
Exactly. I'm just like, more ways to think about the same thing is always helpful. So I like thinking of it from a visual kind of perspective. What am I actually trying to create in my body, and why? Because like depending on the music, you might want to hit a wall and then come back, or you might want to make it big and have it reverb out. And that's more of like a pulsing action. When it overshoots and dissipates back, that's like a pulsed musical action.
And I know that like personally, I never think of like, especially with hip hop styling, I never think like, okay, I need to, I need to flex this muscle to do this, right? I don't think that. I think, okay, I want to stop my right arm. And so by stopping my right arm, obviously that's going to be activating my muscle. But I'm not thinking about, okay, I need to activate this muscle. I think about, okay, I want to stop my right arm.
Yeah, and you just add or take away energy depending on how strong the effect you want.
So if there's no questions about any of that, we shall move on to our lottery.
Our lottery winner for this week, Robert. Are you cool with me sharing the link to your video in the comments so people can watch it? All right, cool. I will go fetch it. All right, go ahead and take a look and let us know when you are all done.
I think it's a longer video, so.
Yeah, so maybe just watch the first minute and a half and you can finish it later tonight. First of all, Robert, thank you for submitting your video. Excited to finally have like a leader to give feedback to, because I love talking about leading. That's how you get me talking for hours and hours and hours on end. So before I share the screen, we had just like a couple of like overarching things to mention. Because this is a blues song, we notice you're not doing full triple steps very often. You tend to do a lot of hitches, so like kickball changes or taps tap and replace, which are great styling, but you need to just flip the ratio. So you're doing a larger amount of actual fully weight transferred triple steps, and just having the hitches and the taps as your styling, as seasoning over the top instead of as your foundation.
Right.
So that was like, and then we love what your upper body's doing from like waist up. You're doing an amazing job and you're leading really well from your core, which is amazing and excellent for a leader. So what we're about to talk about and get really nerdy with is not, we don't want to undo anything from the waist up, because from the waist up you're doing a great job. So what we're about to talk about is going to hopefully help you so you're not having to work as hard to make that upper body do what it's doing. Because I don't know, watching the video, I was a little curious how tense you feel through your waist and your abdominals. Because if you're working really hard through those muscles to kind of like hold your ribs and your center together, that can be a struggle. And what we talk about now might help reduce that tension. But again, ultimately what you're doing with your upper body is excellent. So great job.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to share the screen. Was there anything you wanted to talk about before we get frame by framey?
Not necessarily. Just saying that, like we were saying about the upper body. So to me, I see 3 different chunks of your body rather than one cohesive unit. And so it's upper body, legs, feet, right? So we want to connect all of that.
Yeah, so we've got 3 sections instead of 1. So what we want to talk about is to help you grounding through your feet. And this is going to be, it's actually going to be really interesting, because last week with Inna, we talked about the order of operations of connection, right? Hands, shoulders, toes, and hips. And what we want to talk to you about is that chain from the toes to the hips. Let me get to the beginning of this section. So, whoa, it jumped. Okay, there we go. Technology, man, it's not my expertise. So we notice a lot of fishing with your feet, kind of like swishing and swimming around. And that tells us you're not grounded and actually using the floor. So hopefully what we teach you tonight will make your job easier in dancing. While it will be harder to learn and practice something new, ultimately this should make it easier for you to dance.
So a lot of, like Cassie was just saying, a lot of the foot movement that I'm seeing is like you're not intentionally placing either at the toe or at the heel. It's kind of just all at once placing down, or it's like half of the foot and then the rest of the foot, right? There's no gradual roll a lot of the time, which I know this was a faster blues song, so you're not going to be quite as articulate with that necessarily. But even still, we want to make sure that we're not placing the whole foot at once.
So if we look at this weight transfer right here, you touch the floor and then the ball of the foot skids forward. So that's one of the fishing things that we're noticing. What we'd want to see is your toe or the ball of your foot making contact with the floor, and then not actually translating across the floor anywhere. You would then want to push down into the floor and let the foot roll from there. So if we, oh, I apologize for my drawing in advance. So you've got your foot there, and then in the next frame it goes over there. I'm going to turn on ghosting so we can see, and see how your toe is like way out here. But if your foot was back here instead, underneath that last step, you'd have much more control as you roll your foot, toe, heel, and then you push through your glutes to straighten your leg, and then that affects your hip.
Right.
That would help you be much more grounded.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. A lot of it is just that the legs are the missing link, right? So they're not necessarily being pressed all the way through all the time.
And then the other thing I noticed was you have a tendency to dance on the outside edges of your feet, and to kind of let your weight roll there. So I don't know if your ankles feel like they tend to supinate a lot. I know I struggle with that a lot, and it's not fun to deal with as a dancer. But what you can do is try to land on the inside edge of your foot, and then also treat that rolling a resisted release, rolling to the outside of your foot, and not letting your weight carry over too far to the outside edges of your feet.
Yeah.
So like, for instance, right here, you're very much landing on the outside edge of the ball of your foot. And then my computer freaked out. Okay. And then you're pushing down to the outside, and then you're rolling back in because it looks uncomfortable, but it also might be you choosing to style at that moment. I don't know what's going through your head, but landing on that outside edge is going to mess you up if that's part of like the basic of how your feet land on the floor.
And like being more intentional with the placement of your foot on the ground, either toe or heel, or being specific about it is going to help with that as well, because you should be able to start it at one point on your toes and then have control over where you're moving it back, more so than if you kind of just place half of the foot, or if it's not quite as intentional to like what point of the foot you're placing in contact with the floor.
And then you also tend to end up in this position a lot, where your feet are in parallel, but your legs are crossed in front of each other. And like, that's an okay position to end up in sometimes, but you seem to be ending up in that position a lot, which tells us that you don't have the control to do it intentionally or to prevent it from happening.
Right. He says, this all makes sense. I've been trying to fix feet for a while.
Cool. So let's see how good my my drawing skills can get. So we have oh, that's not going to work. I'm going to have to use lines. Okay. This is an experiment, people. Okay. So we have a foot attached to a bent leg and hips. So the foot makes contact with the ground. So this line is the ground, and the toes make contact. The next step is to start rolling through the foot. So the ball of the foot is making contact with the ground, and the rest of the foot is up, and you've still got bent knees and hips. Then the next step, isn't this so beautiful? So beautiful. This will be the blooper next week. All right. So then the heel hits the ground. So your entire foot is flat against the ground. But at this point in time, you should still have a little bit of flex through your knee.
Yeah.
Just a tiny bit. Those are the hips, so knees and hips. And it's that flex through the knee that then allows you to push down into the ground through the heel.
As you straighten that leg.
As you straighten the leg. And that's how you then end up with straight leg, foot on the ground. So not only does that order of operations help you physically feel grounded, but it looks really good. This is what creates the swing action in the hips, actually, because having the delay of straightening the knee after the heel hits the ground is what creates the swing action through the hips. So if we're adding onto the horrible song that nobody will ever forget, we have hands, shoulders, toes, knees, and hips. So we're now adding the knees before we get to the hips. And that is the order of operations for connecting and grounding yourself in the partnership of West Coast Swing. And questions, jokes about my horrible drawings.
Yeah, those were our main notes.
Do you have any questions on that, Robert? And feel free to unmute yourself if that's easier. I would say it's the placing the balls of your feet underneath yourself. Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
For those of you watching the recording who can't see the chat, Robert asked, what would you say is missing most from the formula of order of operations? So it's where on the floor relative to your center of gravity that you're choosing to strike the ball of your foot onto the floor. It's too far out away from you instead of underneath you.
Get that straightening with the same power.
Yeah. And for a leader, there's nuance to that, because a lot of, if you ever take a forward step as a leader, usually it's a heel lead or a toe release, because you're doing a delayed weight transfer to give the follow a post. So I'm not talking about when you're stepping forward onto a heel as a leader. I'm talking about when you're tripling underneath you, or if you're stepping backwards. Yeah. There's more nuance to it, but that's kind of like the general. Does that answer your question? Awesome. Cool. But yeah, you're doing an amazing job with your upper body. So as soon as you, I would say the focus as you're practicing by yourself is to feel really grounded, kind of like your feet are roots in the ground and it's a tree all the way up from your feet up into your torso. And that'll help add stability to your upper body, so you're not having to use as much muscle in your upper body to have the same excellent effect that you're having now with it.
And bonus, it's great for acceleration.
Yep. A really boring way to practice this is just to do merengue, but with West Coast Swing grounding. Just march and practice the order of our operations underneath yourself, of like placing the toe, rolling through the heel, and pushing through the heel to straighten the leg and affect the hip. Merengue swing content. Yes. You heard it here first, people. What was the other thing I said? Snaky. What was the snake one earlier?
Sensation.
Snake sensation. Yes.
Of course. Thank you for submitting.
Yeah, thank you. So is there anything you wanted to talk about to wrap up for this evening?
I don't think so. I think that was pretty much all we had.
Cool.
So,
any last minute questions before we call it a night? So,
all right. Well,
thank you all so much for joining us. Please spread the word. If you know anyone who you think would benefit from some feedback, let them know that they should send us a video. And Alicia and I are in the process of planning out our class that we're going to start hopefully in June. So something to get excited about. Yeah, thank you all for joining us. Have a wonderful evening.
Hi, guys.
But wait, there's more.
It was very sudden. It was like nobody, and then everyone.
For the first time in forever, we're using a real side table.
Can you hear people talking?
Yes. Is that from you?
The window's open. I'm gonna shut my window. Everyone's watching things.
I need a long-term relationship in an apple. It's gonna sit around my house for a little bit before it gets eaten.
I'm not watching it, but I hear the song. It's so good.
I know, I love the song too.
Pun intentional.
Yep.
Bad jokes are starting early tonight. It's excellent. It's a good sign.
He knows. Okay, so what you can't see is this is a very large beer stein that I use for drinking water. It has in puff paint HBIC, which stands for head bitch in charge. So when I'm really dehydrated, this is my go-to glass.
I'm just like sitting here dancing to the music in my head.
Same here.
That's of course that song.
He heard you say Argentine tango and he goes, that's me. I did once in Argentina, but it doesn't count.
All right. Shall we find out who initiated the flub?
This?
Yeah. Let's find out. I think we all want to know. Okay.
I still don't know.
It's kind of like trying to lick your elbow. It's just not going to happen.
That's one way to put that.
Yeah, but you don't want me just going, hey, you little shit, what are you doing?